Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you're part of our journey. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and get ready for a story that will leave you thinking. And if you love inspiring tales, a like goes a long way. She has insufficient income to provide adequate care. These cold words froze the courtroom as the elderly woman's shoulders collapsed. The small girl in the corner clutched her doll tighter, her tears silent against the harsh fluorescent lights. Nobody noticed the man in the back row clenching his jaw. The family court's atmosphere was suffocating. Government-issued chairs, faded posters about child welfare, and the perpetual hum of bureaucracy. The judge shuffled papers while social workers exchanged knowing glances. In the corner, an 8-year-old girl in a dress 2 sizes too large sat motionless, eyes fixed on her grandmother's trembling back. The state facility will provide structure and stability, the judge continued, not looking up from his papers. The grandmother's voice broke as she pleaded, "I'm all she has left." The girl's fingers turned white around her doll's worn fabric. In the back row, Leonardo DiCaprio leaned forward, his casual presence now transformed by something darker brewing behind his eyes. If this moment made you feel something, imagine what's coming next. Hit that like button and stay with us. Subscribe now. Leonardo shifted in his seat, the familiar weight of recognition hanging over him. He'd come to support his foundation's legal team, expecting to review cases, not witness one unfolding. The courtroom's clinical efficiency felt suddenly obscene against the human tragedy playing out. He watched the girl's small shoulders, remembering similar rooms from his research for What's Eating Gilbert Grape and countless child welfare discussions during environmental campaigns. The grandmother stood alone at the plaintiff's table. "I've raised 3 children already." Her voice wavered but didn't break. "I have enough love for Emma." The social worker sighed, an exhale of practiced sympathy that carried no warmth. "Love doesn't pay heating bills," she replied, flipping through a folder thick with assessments, evaluations, and calculations that reduced a family to numbers and columns. Emma's gaze never left her grandmother, those young eyes carrying an old soul's understanding of loss. 3 weeks since her mother's sudden death, and now the system was preparing to sever her last family connection. The social worker's voice droned on about minimum income requirements and suitable living environment standards, each phrase another brick in the wall being built between grandmother and granddaughter. "The state has a responsibility to ensure proper care," the judge intoned, the kind of statement that sounds reasonable until you're on the wrong side of it. A court clerk typed mechanically, documenting the dissolution of a family with the same detachment she might record a traffic violation. In the gallery, other families waiting their turn watched with the distant horror of witnesses to a car crash, grateful for their safety but unable to look away from others' tragedy. Leonardo felt his phone vibrate, likely his assistant wondering about his delay. He silenced it without looking. "Your Honor," the grandmother's voice strengthened, finding dignity in desperation. "I may not have much, but we have each other. Emma's mother, my daughter, would want us to stay together." Her weathered hands clutched a small photo album, proof of a love that spreadsheets couldn't quantify. The judge's expression softened momentarily before professionalism reasserted itself. For a fleeting second, the human being behind the robe emerged, then retreated. The court-appointed attorney cleared his throat, uncomfortable with his assigned role. While Mrs. Peterson's intentions are admirable, the financial assessment clearly indicates. His words faded as Leonardo noticed Emma's doll, a handmade thing, loved to the point of unraveling. The girl held it like it contained her mother's spirit. Leonardo found himself leaning forward, drawn by an invisible current of injustice. This wasn't in his schedule today. He was supposed to review climate initiative proposals with his foundation's legal team in the next building. Yet here he sat, watching a system designed to protect children become the instrument of their pain. The irony wasn't lost on him. An actor who'd portrayed countless emotional scenes now witnessing real heartbreak where no director would call cut. Things are about to take a turn. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe, like our video, and keep watching. Placement will begin next Monday, the judge announced, each word another nail in the coffin of this family's hopes. The state facility in Westbrook has availability. The grandmother's composure finally broke, tears carving paths down cheeks already mapped with a lifetime of worry lines. Emma rose from her seat, her small body electric with the instinctive understanding that her world was ending. A social worker placed a restraining hand on her shoulder. "You can't take me away from Nana." The girl's voice shattered the procedural monotony, raw emotion bursting through the bureaucratic bubble. Heads turned, the gallery spectators suddenly uncomfortable witnesses to genuine pain rather than abstract proceedings. The judge's gavel struck once, a perfunctory gesture against the tide of human emotion. "Mrs. Peterson will have standard visitation rights," the judge continued, attempting to rebuild the wall of formality. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her machine, uncertain how to transcribe the quiet devastation unfolding. In the suddenly silent courtroom, the shuffle of Leonardo's clothing as he stood was audible. Several heads turned, recognition dawning on faces, that familiar phenomenon when fictional worlds and reality unexpectedly collide. Leonardo hadn't planned to speak. He was here as an observer, not a participant. Yet the gravity of the moment pulled words from him before he could consider their consequence. "Your Honor, may I approach?" His voice, familiar to millions, resonated differently here, stripped of scriptwriter's polish and director's guidance. This was Leonardo DiCaprio, the man, not the actor. The judge blinked, professional composure momentarily fractured by celebrity's unexpected intrusion. "Sir, this is a closed proceeding. If you're not directly involved—" "I'm with the Earth Alliance Foundation," Leonardo interrupted, stepping forward. "We have a community support program specifically designed for cases like Mrs. Peterson's." The statement wasn't entirely accurate. The foundation focused primarily on environmental issues, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. They did have community programs, and in this moment, Leonardo was prepared to create a new one if necessary. The social worker's expression morphed from surprise to skepticism. "Mr. DiCaprio, while we appreciate your concern, there are procedures and requirements." She stopped as Leonardo approached the bench, the courtroom's atmosphere shifting as reality recalibrated around his presence. Emma's grandmother looked up, confusion momentarily displacing despair, while Emma herself stared wide-eyed, the surreality of seeing Jack from Titanic in her grandmother's custody hearing temporarily eclipsing her fear. "Your Honor," Leonardo continued, his demeanor shifting to something more familiar to those who'd seen his environmental advocacy speeches. "I understand there are procedures, but there's also discretion built into the system. The purpose of family court isn't to separate families, but to protect children." He gestured toward Emma, whose grip on her doll had loosened slightly. Hope, a dangerous visitor after weeks of despair. The judge studied Leonardo, weighing celebrity against protocol. "Mr. DiCaprio, while I appreciate your interest, this court makes decisions based on clear legal standards, not charitable impulses." The words were measured, careful. A judge suddenly aware that his routine Tuesday docket had become something that might appear in tomorrow's news. Leonardo nodded, acknowledging the rebuke, but not accepting it. "Of course, Your Honor. Standards exist to serve children's interests, but sometimes we forget to ask what those interests truly are." He turned slightly, addressing not just the judge but the entire courtroom. Has anyone asked Emma what she wants? A ripple moved through the gallery. The court-appointed attorney shifted uncomfortably. The social worker's lips pressed into a thin line. This wasn't procedure. This wasn't protocol. This was a Hollywood star reminding professionals of the human element they processed daily. Leonardo hadn't come prepared with legal arguments or financial solutions, but he'd spent years speaking truth to power about climate change, and injustice was injustice, whether against the planet or an 8-year-old girl. This story is only getting deeper. What would you do in this situation? Comment below, and let's talk. The judge set down his gavel, suddenly conscious of its weight. Mr. DiCaprio, this court appreciates your concern, but family placement decisions require financial stability. Mrs. Peterson's income falls significantly below our threshold. His tone suggested the conversation was over, but Leonardo had faced too many closed doors in his advocacy work to retreat now. Your Honor, may I submit that thresholds are guidelines, not commandments. Leonardo moved closer to Emma's grandmother, standing not as a celebrity witness, but as a fellow human. Mrs. Peterson lacks financial resources, but Emma has something more valuable in her care: continuity, love, and family connection during profound trauma. Phones emerged throughout the courtroom, recording surreptitiously despite rules against it. The judge noticed but didn't intervene, an unconscious acknowledgement that this moment had transcended ordinary proceedings. The social worker rose, clutching her folder like armor. Mr. DiCaprio, with all due respect, you're not a child welfare professional. These standards exist to ensure children don't face neglect. Neglect takes many forms, Leonardo replied, his voice carrying the quiet intensity familiar to those who'd seen his climate speeches, including separating a child from her only family when alternatives exist. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, what if financial concerns were removed from the equation? Would Mrs. Peterson be considered suitable then? The question hung in the air, a simple query that exposed the system's underlying machinery. The judge studied Leonardo, then glanced at Mrs. Peterson, then finally at Emma. For perhaps the first time that day, he truly saw the child behind the case number. Financial stability is one factor among many, but a significant one. Leonardo nodded, then reached inside his jacket. Your Honor, I'd like to submit this. He produced a business card, handing it to the bailiff. My foundation's lawyer. We're prepared to establish a trust for Emma's care and education, administered by an independent trustee, with Mrs. Peterson as guardian. The social worker stepped forward. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We can't make placement decisions based on celebrity interventions. Her voice carried a note of panic, the system's representative watching its carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. It's not about celebrity, Leonardo replied, turning to face the courtroom directly. His voice lowered, losing its practiced public cadence, becoming something more raw. It's about being human, about recognizing that sometimes the right thing doesn't fit neatly into a bureaucratic checkbox. He gestured toward Emma. Ask her. Ask her where she feels safe, where she belongs. The courtroom fell silent. Emma's grandmother reached out, her weathered hand finding her granddaughter's small one. The girl's fingers interlaced with her grandmother's, an unconscious gesture that spoke volumes more than case files and income statements. The judge cleared his throat. Young lady, he addressed Emma directly for the first time, would you like to tell the court where you wish to live? The formality of his language couldn't disguise the humanity breaking through. Emma looked at her grandmother, then at the judge, then briefly at Leonardo. Her voice, when it came, was small, but unshakably clear. With Nana. She makes pancakes like Mommy did. She knows how to fix my doll when she breaks. She ... The girl's voice caught. She still has Mommy's laugh. Simple words, devastating in their clarity. Leonardo didn't speak. No words could improve on the child's truth. The social worker's expression softened despite herself. The court reporter's fingers had stopped moving, the human moment transcending official record. The judge looked at his papers, then set them aside in a gesture both small and monumental. This court will take a 15-minute recess. I'd like to speak with counsel for both sides along with Mr. DiCaprio and his foundation's representative in chambers. He stood, the black robe suddenly seeming less like authority and more like the simple clothing of a man tasked with impossible choices. As the judge exited, murmurs filled the courtroom. Emma's grandmother turned to Leonardo, tears streaming freely now. "Why?" she asked simply. "You don't know us." Leonardo's answer came without hesitation. Because being an adult means speaking for those who can't speak for themselves. He glanced at Emma, who was watching him with the direct gaze only children possess, unfiltered by social pretense. And sometimes, making sure they're heard when they do. It's not over yet. The best part is coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. "20 minutes stretched to 30. The gallery remained full, usual courthouse exits delayed by the magnetism of unfinished drama. When the judge returned, his face was composed but subtly different. The mask of procedural detachment replaced by something more human. Leonardo sat beside Mrs. Peterson now, a physical embodiment of support that didn't go unnoticed by anyone present. Having consulted with all parties, the judge began, his voice carrying new warmth. This court finds that Emma Peterson's best interests are served by remaining in her grandmother's care, with financial support administered through a trust established by the Earth Alliance Foundation. He looked directly at Emma. "Young lady, you'll be staying with your grandmother." The words landed like spring rain after drought. Emma's face transformed, grief temporarily suspended by pure relief. Her grandmother covered her mouth, shoulders shaking with silent gratitude. The social worker nodded slowly, acknowledgement that sometimes bureaucratic defeat could be human victory. "The court thanks Mr. DiCaprio for his intervention and financial assistance," the judge continued. "A detailed care plan will be filed within 30 days, with quarterly reviews for the first year." The formal language couldn't disguise the extraordinary nature of what had just occurred, a system momentarily bent toward compassion by unexpected advocacy. As the courtroom emptied, Emma's small hand found Leonardo's, tugging gently on his sleeve. "Are you really Jack from the boat movie?" she asked, childhood's remarkable capacity for normality reasserting itself even amidst exceptional circumstances. Leonardo crouched to her level, smiling with genuine warmth rather than camera-ready precision. "I played Jack in a movie, yes. But today, I'm just Leonardo, someone who believes families belong together." His simple answer seemed to satisfy her. Mrs. Peterson approached, dignity returning to her posture now that the weight of impending loss had lifted. "Mr. DiCaprio, I don't know how to thank you," she began, but Leonardo shook his head. "No thanks needed. Just promise you'll make those pancakes she mentioned." His smile reached his eyes, the real smile actors sometimes forget in the glare of constant exposure. "My foundation will contact you tomorrow about the trust details. It's structured to provide for Emma's needs through college while leaving you as her guardian in all ways that matter." Outside the courtroom, phones captured the moment. Leonardo DiCaprio exiting with the grandmother and her granddaughter, his hand resting protectively on the older woman's elbow. By evening, the story would race across social media, offering rare consensus in divided times. A celebrity had used privilege not for personal gain, but to bend a rigid system toward humanity. 2 weeks later, Leonardo received a hand-drawn card. A child's artwork, a tall figure with yellow hair standing beside a smaller figure and an older one. "Thank you for saving me and Nana," the childish scrawl read. Enclosed was a photograph. Emma and her grandmother in their small apartment. The girl's smile returned from wherever grief had hidden it. Leonardo placed it on his desk beside climate change legislation drafts and foundation reports. A reminder that while systems sometimes required tectonic shifts, individual lives could be changed through simple presence and will. He hadn't planned to become involved that day, hadn't awakened intending to alter a family's trajectory. But being an adult, truly adult, meant recognizing moments that required action. The story continued spreading, referenced in discussions about child welfare reform and celebrity responsibility. Some criticized judicial flexibility for the famous, but more recognized the essential truth. A child remained with loving family because someone with power chose to use it for others. In interviews afterward, Leonardo deflected personal praise, redirecting attention to thousands of similar cases without celebrity intervention. But Emma didn't care about viral stories or policy debates. She cared that she slept in her own bed, with her grandmother's voice calling goodnight from the next room. That her doll remained unconfiscated by well-meaning state custody. That the last connection to her mother, her grandmother's laugh, so similar it sometimes made her heart stop, remained within daily reach. Something broken hadn't been fixed, but it hadn't been broken further. And sometimes, that was victory enough. Wow, what a story! If this moved you, imagine what else we have for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and let us know what you think.